Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to start this Bava daf Pei Vav. We're going to begin on the bottom of Pei Hey with base 4 lines from the bottom. So we were learning whether or not a person can be kona an object which is still in the reshus of the moicher by having it put into the kalim of the lekeach. So Amar Rava Tashma Masha Chamarav Ufoalav. Let's say you have these riders of donkeys and workers that are doing Mashicha, and they actually bring it into a person's house. Ben pasak ad shloi madad, ben madad ad shloi pasak, shnei michal lachshaban. So it doesn't make any difference if there were pasak, as we saw in yesterday's daf, that a person, they agreed to a certain price of how much they were going to pay, which you would think therefore they're samech das, at least because of that. But since in that situation it was not measured, or if it was measured but they didn't actually designate, shnei michal lachshaban, so both of them could retract. So let's look at the Rashba. So ben pasak ad shloi madad. If they wish, even though they have a set price, they could retract, provided it's before the measuring. The boy nikna lo the b'may nikna lo mashichas tavua yesh lo reshus lekech yesh. There's no mashicha, as we said. There's also no din of reshus lekech. The oidim al tzavarim, because it's still on their shoulders. It was not put into the rishus, sorry, a little pirkan, because it was not yet, again, removed. As we'll see in the Seifa, Kedemuchach b'Seifa, Dekatani ba pirkan mechlal, the Reisha below pirkan. We're going to end up seeing, based on the Seifa, the Reisha must be talking about it's still on their shoulders. El hachnasa ba'alma. All they did was bring it in there. Shemashchan v'achnisa l'sach beisa. Katani, v'hach meshicha la meshichahi. So you can say 1 second. Well, it's not meshicha because the fact that they're bringing it, so that's meshicha. That's not considered meshicha, says Rashbam. Liknei shaharya adam hu moishich. U'meshichas adam toin peros lo mahanya liknois as a peros ad shimshach a peros atzma. You actually have to do the meshicha on the item itself. But if you have, let's say, a worker in which he's pulling a donkey and on it is laden with fruits, so that doesn't mean anything because you're not actually doing mashicha on the fruits, or on a wagon. That's not considered to be mashicha. You actually have to do mashicha on the fruits themselves. So over here there was no mashicha, and therefore, even though one of these other two things were done, again, because the language of, as we started, was mashach, but it's not considered to be a halachic mashicha, that would be a kinyan, and therefore, even though you at least had one of these two, that either was a set price but not measured, or measured not a set price, so the din is they could back out. Says Rashbam, ad shloi pasak in bo lachser koinem pisuk chayzin, they can always back out. Alpha pi shehuncha atah b'shas medida b'rshusai the kelach v'kela the lekech l'kanya b'rshusai. So apparently this is going to be a raya that you cannot be kaina b'rshus moicher, the kalim of the lekeach. V'afil mashicha kaidem pisak lo mahanya. Interesting enough, even if you actually did mashicha, but if you didn't actually, as we saw before, designate a specific price, it doesn't help. A person's not going to be simach das because each one, as the Rashbam continues, says that they're going to change the price, right? So the buyer's going to be like, okay, great, Mashiach was done, but what if he ends up charging me $1 million? Or they're like, all right, so, or the moicher, the seller, will say it's not worth it because this guy may think I'm giving it to him for $1 or something. So you have to have a set price. If you don't have the set price, then you can retract. But the point over here is that even though you have a set price, But since Madad didn't take place, so they can both retract. Okay, but that's only because, as we're now going to clearly see, as we continue to pay Bava Mid Aleph, that the Reish is talking because it's still on them, it's still on their shoulders. Pirkon, it was removed, says Rashban, Bein Moicher, Bein Loikeach, whether it was the buyer or the seller, V'chnis l'Rishus, was put into this Rishus, Yeshkan hanocha b'Rishus Loikeach. So now it was actually put into the Rishus of the Loikeach, so Yeshkan chiluk. Here there's going to be a difference. Says the Gemara, if you designate and even in a measure, because at this point, says the Rashbam, therefore, since it was put into the Rishus Loikeach, even though it wasn't measured, we don't care about the measurement at that point. Madad ad shloi pasak shnei michol nachsman. As we said, if you're not pasak, if you didn't designate a price, then you could always back out. But the chiddush over here is that once it's put down, it's off his shoulders, and it's put down into his rishus, then even though madad didn't take place, pasak kol madad, they can no longer retract. And on this, the Rashbam says, alma kli loy chasher rishuse. So the fact that it was already in this person's property before it's put down, it's not considered a separate thing. Medida namilo ma'akva. So we already see that medida is not ma'akev. That just as long as it was put down and it was met, and we have a certain amount of agreement as to the price, so then automatically you can no longer back out. Now says the Gemara, now, if we're dealing over here, which is this case, that the moicher, it's the keli of the moicher that was brought into the Rishus Loikeach, and as long as it's not put down on the Rishus of the Loikeach, it's not a kinyan. So therefore, we can also deduce the other way around, maybe that keli of the Loikeach now Rishus Moicher Loikana. Just like the kli of the moicher brought into the Rishus of the Loikeach won't work, so therefore the kli of the Loikeach brought into the Rishus of the moicher also shouldn't work, and therefore that's the proof. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak, not necessarily. We're talking about a case b'shit shavchan, where it was poured out. Says the Rashbam, Hai Pirkon, when it says that it was removed or unloaded, Hainu Shapirkon was shavchan min hasakin lekarka. It was poured out onto the ground on the base of shloikeach. Deleka kale of the meicher. Over here, we're not even talking about a kli of a meicher at all. The hilkach kanyali lekeach reshuso. The reason why the lekeach is kainet is because we're not talking about that it was actually put down on the ground with its kli. It was just poured out. That's one explanation. So ikbid rava midi shavchan katani pirkan katani. You're not being sensitive to the language. It's mashma that it was put down, says Rashbam, kamoy shahayu. It was actually put down the way it was on their shoulders. So how can you tell me that it just spilled out? Omar Marbravashi, rather, okay, it was actually put down, but we're talking about bimisachli de tume. We're talking about these bundles of garlic that do not require a sack. Says Rashbam, chavila shumin deleka sakin. So here there's no kli at all, so therefore it's no proof. We're not talking about there was a kli and there wasn't kaina in the Rishus Loikeach. So too over there, it won't work for just the kli of the Loikeach and Rishus Meicher. We're talking about a case where there's no kli at all, because they're just bundles of garlic. So Amarle Hunabari de Marzutral Ravina Michti. Let's understand this. Pirkan Katani. It mentions that it was unloaded. So Mali Pasak, Mali Loy Pasak. What's the difference? And we already answered this. What's the difference whether or not they agreed to a price? So Amarle Pasak Samchadaite Lo Pasak Lo Samchadaite. As we said, it doesn't make any difference because once until the time in which it's been calculated exactly how much we're going to pay, known as samech das, as we saw before, because each one is concerned about what the price will be. And therefore, in the case of loy pasak, since they're not samech das, they could always retract. Amrli Rabbeinu Ravashi Tashma Derabu Shmuel Demertavayu. They both say that Kel Shel Adam Kaina Lo B'Chol Makom. Now they said this statement that the kalim of a person can be kaina items anywhere. Now, l'sui mai lavu sirishus meicher. L'chayra that's talking about it's the kli of the lekeach, and it's coming to tell you that it'll be even kaina rishus meicher, and this should be a raya. No, so that's true, and it sometimes does work. Bahasam dermule zilkani. It depends. In the event, says the Rashbam, that the meicher, the seller sells, it says zilkani. I want you to be kaina my item. And he writes a shiknolcha kelecha. I want your kli to work to command the moishele makoim hanachas keladami. It's keilu like he's renting out that space for him so that it'll work. Makikim aboil and stama. So again, the fact that, and this is l'divrei koil, if the moicher says, I don't care that you're in my rishus, the rishus moicher, I don't care that it's the kli of the lekeach, I want you to be kainit in my place. So if he says that, then of course it's going to work, because the moicher is saying that it's okay for it to work. But what if he doesn't say this? That's the question. Okay, so fine. So we look in the question 5. Rav Shimon Bertavau Kel Shel Adam Kodesh B'Chol Makom. So B'Chol Makom, what does that come to include? L'chayr, it's coming to include our case. As we said, a rishus moicher, the kli of lekech, rishus moicher. However, that's only because the moicher said zil knik b'kelecha. I want your keli to be kainit. However, the whole question of the Gemara is b'stama. Does it work also when it comes to stop? Which is the same question as TB11. I wrote Bershus Moicher b'makom shamoicher omer liknois hasavik b'makom shamoicher omer liknois stam. So he doesn't. It's just he doesn't say I want your kli to be kainit. So in that situation, this is where the Gemara's question continues. So the Gemara says as follows: Tanan Hasam. So it's brought down in Masechtas Kedushin. The Chasam Shesham Achrayis. When it comes to karka, we know you can be kind of land with money, shtar, and with a chazaka. You actually have to do a kinyan through mashicha, pulling the metalton. However, also mishmei the Rav Kahana. Some say it was mishmei the Rava. The only time we say this distinction, this din, is only ella devarim shein darchen lahagbia. It's impossible for you to do hagbah. So then, because they're so heavy, so therefore we say, okay, fine, do mashicha. Devarim shedarchen lahagbia, something which is a little bit lighter, bahagba in mashicha lo. So the only time we allow you to do mashicha with metaltalin is only if it's very, very heavy. Too heavy to physically lift up. But if you can do hagbah, because it's not so heavy, so then in that situation, better do that. So Yosef Abayim, so he's saying, he was engaged in this sugya, and Esve Ravana bar Mastal Abaye. So they posed the question to Abaye regarding this. So we have a case of a gainev kiss b'Shabbos. A person is stealing money on Shabbos, a wallet, and he takes it from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So we have two issues: Geneva, in which he would maybe have to pay it back, but also he's chayiv misa for bringing an item from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. And if it's happening at the same time, we apply the concept of Kimim b'Rabbi, and therefore we're only going to give him the stronger punishment. He'll be potter from Tashlumin. So what do we say? A gainim kiss b'Shabbos chayiv, doesn't matter. You're still chayiv to pay. You were kinda the money in the wallet before you brought it into the Rosh Hashanah, so it didn't happen at the same time. Now, l'chayra, apparently the reason why, and therefore you don't say this is because apparently, as the Rashbam says, Shekavar Nischayev B'Geneva, when did you, or Yichayev B'Shas Hagbah? Because the Hagbah Koine B'chol Makim. The fact you picked it up, so you're Koine it. V'Yisur Shabbos Leikad Shas Haitzah. So you can actually be Koine Geneva even though you're apparently in someone else's Rishus, because you had the intention to steal and you lifted it up in that regard. So therefore you're going to be Chayav for Geneva, and then afterwards you'll be Chayav for Shabbos later on, and therefore you still have to pay. However, let's say you didn't do Hagbah, but you had apparently this relatively light wall, which you could have done Hagbah, but instead of doing Hagbah, you decided to do a different kinyan. You were dragging it, potter. You don't have to pay. Shahar Isser Shabbos Kechad. Now, Bahari Kiyis Davar Hagbahu. We just said it's something that could be physically lifted up, and you could do Hagbah. Apparently, we see that you could be kind of Mashicha. So again, the whole notion is if you're pulling it, you cannot be kind of Mashicha in this other person's domain. It's only Hagbah's kind of Mechol Malchaim. But Mashicha, you have to actually bring it out of the Rishus of the Nignav. So therefore, once you take it out, then you're Chayav for Misa and Geneva at the same time. It's Boin Kechad. The question is, how is that true? How is that even a kinyan? Because if Hagbah works, then Mashicha shouldn't work, I thought we just said. Armalei bimisna. We're talking about that it was with straps. So what is that referring to? So says the Rashbam. Let's make sure we have it over here. Shahar Isser Shabbos Achiv Gnev Boin Keachad. Okay. Umokminin law Kishesiref Yadol Lamata Megimel. So we ended up saying we're talking about a case where it's below, your hand is below 3 tfachim from the ground. The kibble of Yadol Shel Adam Chashuv Loi Kedal Al Dalad, and your hand is like a rishus, like a yachid, because it's 4x4. Even though it's not 4x4. The kanyu Lo Batle. Okay, so anyway, so answered, B'misna says Rashbam, Kach Hashiva Stam. This is how he answers it. V'savar Rav Ada, the kiss Katanhu. He thinks it's referring to a small wallet. The Tamal Teretz Zeh, and it's a little bit of a quandary what exactly he means. Yermale Ananami Misna Kaminalach. I understand I'm talking about a case with straps. Like what? How does that help? The fact that there's straps, you can still do hagbah with it. So how's that an answer? And that's what the Gemara is going to ask now. So what exactly are you talking about? How's that answer the question? Or Malay, we're talking about something that needs straps. In other words, since it's a large purse, it required a strap, and it is heavy, so you can't normally lift it up. You can't just simply do hagbah with it, and therefore that's what it's talking about. If it's something small, you're right, then you can just do hagbah. However, because this part of your nigra, why are you dragging it? What are you doing? Just pick it up. What are you doing? So the reason is it so you don't have to be chayiv, right? Because you're a big Talmud Chacham, Ganav? No, it's because it's very heavy. And that's the reason why Mashiach works. Tashma. Rishus Moicher, if you're in the Rishus of the Moicher, Loikana, then you can't acquire something ad shiag biena until you lift it up, because again, even though you're just in the moicher, you could pick it up and hagbah is kind of b'chol makom. Oh, ad shiag sinim rishuso, or you have to physically take it out. Alma midi devar hagbah. We're talking about something in which you could do hagbah and you could still take it out, and that would be another kinyan. Now, e-boy b'hagbah kanile, e-boy b'mashiach kanile. Understand, you shouldn't be able to do either one. If it's heavy, then fine, do mashiach. If it's light, then do hagbah. So what is this talking about? So Rav Nachman Yitzchak, let's studin katani. You actually have to read it with studin. So in other words, it depends on what we're talking about. Something which is heavy, then you do mashicha. Something which is light, do hagbah. Midi devar hagbah b'hagbah. Midi devar mashicha. That's it. That's how we get around this question. Okay, before I turn the daf. Question 10. All right, let's look at TA 10 before we turn the daf. So we actually had this Matai Pshita de Kilshal Loikech Rishus Meicher Kan Loikech, which is mamish the same question that we just had, this TA 10, and in the event the Armalei where he said Zil Kani. the Moicher says Zil Kani B'Kilecha, then certainly it will work. Okay, so let's continue on to Pei Vav Amid Beis. So Tashma. Tashma. So we can learn out from the Masnisin of a Moicher Peris. A Moicher Peris L'Chavero, a person who sells fruits to his friend. So Mashach V'Loi Madad, let's say he did Mashicha on the fruits, but he didn't measure it, so Kani. So the fact that you did Mashicha, it's a Kinyan. Now again, V'Ha Peris, the B'nei Hagbandin, who have like an apple, pick it up, right? V'Gatani did kind of Mashicha. So what are you talking about? Fruit's light. So how do we understand that you can do Mashicha if it's light? Apparently you should be doing Hagbah. Hachmaiskinan b'shlife Rabbi. We're talking about large bundles. So you can obviously understand. If it's large bundles, it's not so easy to lift up, says the Rashbam. B'shlifi, fine, let's finish this up. Yihachim a Seifa. The Seifa says, if you purchase flax from your friend, well, kana, you're not coin it, you have to actually move it. I'll do what? Pishtan b'shilfe rarve milo avdi? Understand, they don't make them into large bundles. So how do we understand this? If the Reish is talking about large bundles, and it says that you could do Mashicha, so then why does it give us this other Eitzah? Obviously, these could be large bundles. So Shani Pishtan Dimishtamit. When it comes to Pishtan, it's very slippery, and therefore, even though, we need to mention this case. Oh, let's look at the Rashbam. So the B'Shlevi Zutri Masnis. It actually sounds like from our Mishnah that when we're talking about giving fruits, again, that it must be something which should be quite heavy, quite light. Midamifli b'seifa gabi pishtan, because we're talking about, no, it's large bundles. What do you mean by pishtan? It says hamaycha peris mashach lo imadad kana the mashichas kolshehu mahani beperis. The smallest amount of mashicha works shari davar muadhu, because it's such a small amount. The mashichas kolshehu neker kulam mimkaima. Once you move a small amount, the whole thing is moved. However, we saw before it came to a boat, even though it's a machlokas, they have to move the boat a little bit or the entire length of the boat. Ad sheyimshach as kula, the whole thing needs to be moved. Of a meicher pishtan shu aruch, when it comes to pishtan, which is long, afal gab dehavi shlivi zutri, even if, let's say, we're talking about small bundles, lukanda b'mashichas porta, moving it a little bit won't work. Shadayin lo neker kuloi mimkoimo, because the whole thing wasn't moved. Ad shetalenum b'makam zel makam acher. Therefore, the whole thing needs to be moved. Claimer, Shim Shechunu, you have to do Mashicha, Yagbianu, well, Makam Achar, lift it up to another place. She Necker Kuam Makoim, Shahayasham. And it has to be completely removed. The Equal Mamer, the Filo Rab, the Poli Bisfina, as we said, was a Machokas by boat, does have to be moved, the small amount of the whole thing. Hacham Maida, he'll agree. The Hasam, Maimish Tachtav, there's water underneath. Umedaini porta, and therefore just moving in a small amount, chashiva can nekrakul mimkoima. It's considered like the whole thing was moved. Avol al gabi karka, if it's on the ground, iklamir medamoidi. Maybe he'll agree. So there could be a difference between a boat which is floating in the water, moving it a little bit, as opposed to something which is on the ground. So we end up saying b'shlifi zut ravravi. We're talking about large bundles, says the Rashbam. So, how do we make a distinction between Paris and Pishtan? Hamoshech Paris, when you do Mashicha, Pamim, sometimes she Moshech Kana. Taka, sometimes you could do Mashichan, even though we're talking about fruits. If they're small bundles, you're right, then you should do Hagbah on it. But if they're large bundles, then in that situation they're so heavy, then you should do Mashicha. The Hasam Vadi Mahani Mashicha, Vakoshkin Hagbah. Of Hamoicher Pishtan, when it comes to Pishtan, you can't have large bundles. They're all small. You have to move them. You have to do Hagbah and not Mashicha when it comes to these bundles, because these bundles of Pishtan are always small. So says the Rashbam, Atu Pishtam Shliva Rabbi Milo Abdi. You understand? You can't make them big. Her answer is shani pishin the mishtamit. They're slippery. Shemachalik then yichom lasos menu masais gedolos. No, actually, it's not true. You cannot make them large because they're so slippery. Hilkach boy hagba, because when it comes to pishdan, so you need to do hagba because they're light. The darker bekach. So a very interesting idea. So by pishdan, let me just make sure I have this down. By pishdan, it is always a small bundle. And since it's always a small bundle, so you do hagba. Okay? Mash'en kain by peros, it depends if it's a large bundle or not. So if it's a large bundle, then taka you can do mashiach. If it's a small bundle, you do hagba. That's it. Okay, that's basically how we're answering it. Okay. Weiter. Amrule Ravina Ravashi Tashma. Behema Gasa, this is also in Kedushin. You have a large animal, Niknas Mimasira. So you can be kinda a large animal by passing over the reins or something along those lines. Vadaka, small animal hagbal, lifted up to Rameir. The Shimon Melez of Chachamim, Diva Rameir of Shimon Melez of Chachamim, Oimrim, Behema Daka. You're telling me by Behema Daka it's Mahagba. I tell you it's b'mashicha. Now behema daka davar hagbahi. If it's a small animal, you can lift it up. The kind of b'mashicha. How could you tell me that it could be kind of b'mashicha? Apparently, you shouldn't have to do hagba because it's light. Noshana behema titzarcha. It's different when it comes to an animal because it digs its feet in the ground. In other words, it could be hard to do mashicha, to do hagba rather, even when we're dealing with behema daka, which seems to be easy to lift up, but it's not so easy. And therefore, it's the normal manner instead to do mashicha. Okay. Weiter. A person uses this language and says, a kur, a measurement of 30, I am selling to you. So even though he keeps giving him a bunch, but it's only once he actually receives the entire 30 that's considered to be a sale, to the extent that he cannot back out. But until that point, the fact that he was saying this specific amount must be that he was precise in what he wanted. Says the Rashbam, obviously, we're dealing with the amount of money connected it. However, he didn't wish any less than that. He was very specific. So the reason why he can always back out before he gets the whole thing is because he didn't want less of it. Even though they designated the price, even though it's actually this item was moved into the buyer's domain, even if it belongs, it's in the kelim of the lekech, still ad shehei kor moded kuloi. You actually have to measure the entire thing. Now, normally we say medida is not ma'akev, but over here it is. Why? The fact that they stipulated this specific amount, it obviously shows that they are makbid on the exact amount, and therefore in this case medida would be ma'akev. Therefore they could back out. Mikol mechira afilu kishamadad loy chavtes soin. Even if they did 29. As long as the last saw wasn't put down, then it doesn't. They can retract. And the Rashbam again says, even if you did mashicha, and mashicha malya, the korzeh chad mekachu. It's all considered to be one. And if the whole thing wasn't there, then it doesn't work. However, if you use a different language of kor b'shloishim saw. Now that sounds like I'm giving you a certain amount of money for each saw that you give me, but it'll eventually equal a core. Nonetheless, since you broke it down into like smaller increments, therefore in Rishon kaina, every single time a person gives a certain amount, so then in that case, it'll be kaina. Okay. Says Rashbam, Shekol Echad Mechira B'fnei Atzmehi, because it's all considered to be a Mechira, one Mechira is separate from the other. Toshma, Im Hoisa Mida Shel Echad Mehem Rishon, Im Hoisa Mida Shel Echad Mehen Rishon Koina. So he says that if, let's say, the sale, the measurement is on one of them, so then you're koina each one separately. V'afal gav deloy nismal hamida. Now it's mashma, even though the whole thing wasn't completely filled up. So it's the Kash and Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi and Shmuel say that even if you got 29 core, 29 selah, but you didn't finish the 30th, you can always retract. Over here it's mashma that you cannot retract. Where it says kigoy dermale hin b'shneim aser salayim. It's because the reason why you can't retract is because you broke it down, as we saw like in the Seva. And you said lug b'sel ani moichlacha. Ukri Omer Rav Kahana shenasos hayu behin hachanam shenasos hayu b'midos. Look in the Rashbam on the bottom. Shenasos hayu behin. He had markings, just like the markings in the base of Mikdash. Shel kodesh ad kan lapar, ad kan la'ayil, ad kan lekeves. So there was a special measuring cup which told you exactly how much you should put in. Kolemer simanim, there was actual markings. Lamidas chatzihin lapar, shlishashin la'ayil, ervisahin lekeves yoyin. So since the cup is a measuring cup, so each time it reaches a mark on the cup, it's a mechira. And with this type of cup, it's not necessary to say only once the cup is completely full for the mechira to work. The fact that you have all these different measuring marks, it's clear that once you hit certain parts, so then at that point that will be that part will already be sold. Okay, we're going to stop here. Let's look at question 6 possibly. So there's an interesting peros and pishton. So madua hamida b'gemara reish and mastisim b'shilfi Rabbi. Why, when it talks about fruits, we're talking about large fruits, and there, because it says mashicha, which apparently means you can't do hagbah because it's too hard heavy. But Iri save of the pishton is it's small because it's slippery, so it's always that way. So let's see what he writes. Reish Mayri b'shilfi Rabbi. The reish is talking about that they're very heavy bundles of fruit. The imlo kain, otherwise, if it was just like one apple, then you should do hagbah and not mashicha. The seifa of pishton, according to the Rashbam, is talking about zutri. Again, they're small bundles. Shekain derech la'asaisim. That's how it's normally done. The agav zutrayu, since it's small, nikdim b'hagbah. You could just do hagbah. Now the Rashbam also quotes the Rabbeinu Chananel. It says that when it comes to pishtan, ma'rafil b'Rabbi. It could actually be talking about even large bundles. The ein darkam b'mashicha klal. In that situation, it was just never the normal way for a person to do mashicha at all. Okay. Let me just see if there's another question over here. No, not on TA, TB. Adkan.